If you look at our telomeres and you look at our chromosomes, you can see that around 250 to 300,000 years ago, there was a fusion that happened. They know that couldn't have happened naturally, and they have no explanation for it.
Hello and welcome back to the Alex Withrow Show. Today I have a very interesting guest. His name is Faust Checho. He is the owner of the Far Out with Faust podcast as well on YouTube and an avid conspiracy researcher. Very exciting to have you here, Faust. We're going to get into a lot of conspiracies today. So you are an expert on YouTube and on Instagram with regards to conspiracies.
I am. Well, I mean, you know, of course, conspiracy just means more than one person in on what could be called a criminal, event. But I'm a avid researcher of history, and a lot of, I would say it's safe to say that true history has been classified.
True history has been classified
along with a lot of reality.
Yeah.
And so that's been when my path took because we were both actors. That's how we know each other,
right.
And around 2017, 16, my path really took a more spiritual turn, and I was still doing acting, but I also started meditating and quieting my mind and opening my perceptions. And when you begin to open your perceptions, you don't just open it to the good, the joy, the beauty, the love. You also open it to the shit. Oh my God! Like, what the fuck has that been going on my whole life? Is this can this be true? You know, and that's the two sides of the coin, and that's why a lot of people who end up very, considered to be spiritual also have a lot of different beliefs about a great many things. And that's not a coincidence.
Right. So let me ask you this. There's a lot of things I'm really excited to ask you about today. I know you and let's start with aliens.
Okay.
Because I love talking about aliens.
Okay.
Aliens is like my favorite thing to talk about. And full disclosure, dude, I went down the rabbit hole on aliens in 2020. I mean, like when we were all locked up in the house, I started and listen, you watch one of those documentaries.
That's right.
I saw, what's that one on Hulu?
Unacknowledged?
Unacknowledged, yes.
Oh, yeah.
I watched Unacknowledged, and after that, I was hooked,
dude.
So I watched everything. I saw all of Dr. Stephen Greer's stuff. I saw a variety of things. I actually, believe this or not, I joined a.
That's right. You told me.
I joined a CE5 group.
Of course, that's awesome, dude.
So for those that don't know, a CE5 group is, I guess you would describe it as a group that seeks to establish contact. With
human initiated contact.
Human initiated contact with
our celestial ET
with
family,
aliens.
extra dimensional.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was super bored in 2020.
Right.
So I had I had just moved to Georgia.
I was on my roof in Manhattan with a fucking headlamp. You know what I mean? Fucking doing the protocols, doing the meditation.
Okay, so we've both established that we're a little kooky. So
very proud.
All right, so if someone's listening to this and they're hearing this and they're like, aliens, really, what's going on out there?
I mean, I would say to them, aliens.
It's
really,
there.
Look in the mirror.
You're an alien.
There's a reason. There's a reason why there's a missing link.
Yeah.
And we can't explain it.
So the missing link. I love this. So talk to me about the missing link. So that refers to Sasquatch, right?
Well, you go back to Neanderthal. You go back to if you want to go back, what archaeology tells us, we have this evolution, non-evolution. Two species don't evolve at the same time. The very concept of evolution would state that. The birds came from the dinosaurs.
Right.
That is a common accepted theory. They're the remnants of the dinosaurs. They evolved from the dinosaurs.
Same with Florida alligators.
Essentially, and that DNA is still intact, if not slightly less large. It has less prey and less area to live in because humans have taken over everything, but. There's a reason why there's a big we can't explain how the fuck we got here in this DNA. Mm-hmm. We just showed up 250,000 years ago. We just show up on the planet.
Okay.
And we have no explanation for it. And so they just write it off and they make wild claims about we came from the Neanderthal. The truth is we were I'm not to be crass, but we were interbreeding with Neanderthals, and I'm sure it was man's idea. I'm sure the Neanderthals was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Or, they couldn't speak quite like us. But the fact is there was interbreeding. We were on the planet at the same time as the Neanderthal, period. That's where the red hair gene comes from. They traced it right back to the Neanderthals, who, of course, were prominent during the Ice Age, not a lot of sun. So it would make sense that their pigment was very, like a ginger.
Sure.
Anyway, I believe through years of research and, that, and of course, there are aspects of every government that is privy to this and keeps this information as guarded as they do the UFO cover up, which is not about really keeping people from knowing the truth, but also it's about keeping control. It's all about control. It's all about keeping the industrial monarchs who have risen into trillions of dollars on their thrones.
So why is it, we've had, I mean, like, I can think of the clip of Barack Obama being on like the late night show with Fallon or Jimmy Fallon or whatever. Or
will you show us the UFO?
Yeah, like they ask him about the UFOs, and he's like, "Yeah, I can't talk about that."
Yeah. Just
but
as if he knows.
Well, when he said it, he sounded like dead serious.
Yeah.
So why is this such a big secret?
I mean, bottom line, and this is why we've lost a century, but it would upend all of our institutions, and it would upend all of our belief systems. And the amount of chaos that they forecast it would have, as opposed to, okay, now that we know, let's make the world a better place. Let's adjust our belief systems. Now that we know that, I mean, it would upend organized religion, which is a form of governance. Rome was like, listen, we got to get the rabble to do what we want. How are we going to do that?
Right.
We need to be able to use fear. If we uniform all beliefs around worship, we borrow some celebrations from this date and this religion, and we put them into one, Christianity, we can rule the rabble. They don't pay taxes. They don't go to church. They're going to go to hell or in this life and the next. They're going to be punished. And so religion is organized religion is a great governance. I'm not speaking against.
Let me ask you this, and I'll play devil's advocate here, no pun intended. In the 1500s, Martin Luther recognized what you're saying. He said that the Roman government has basically annexed the Catholic Church and taken over this to control the masses. That's why the Protestant Reformation started. Right. He said, no, we're getting out of here. We're breaking off.
Right.
And we're starting what's now the Protestant Church. Would you say, I mean, I totally agree that the Catholic Church was commandeered and manipulated by the Roman Empire. Do you think it's any different with the Protestant Church today?
It's just another branch of the same power structure. Mm-hmm. When you learn that the Catholic Church were the primary funders of the Mormons, what? Scratch your head and wonder, why would the Catholic Church be and put hundreds of millions of dollars into a religion that is going to be in, quote, competition to theirs? And that's because the people who run these institutions and religions, they don't do it because they have a devotion to God. It's all a power structure.
Right.
And they needed a power structure that was off the Catholic books in America. And the Church of Latter-day Saints, or whatever the Mormon, was a perfect vehicle for that. And so the church funded the shit out of it because they got a massive amount of assets.
Joseph Smith.
And it works. And so it's just another way for them to have tax-free institutions, foundations with money going in and out with nobody asking questions. That's what religion is used for.
Or Scientology could be.
Scientology is another perfect. Yeah. Look who founded that and who he hung out with.
Yeah,
he hung out with a bunch of really sick people who's had a lot of ideas about how to keep the world under the rule.
I was in that documentary, by the way.
You were?
On HBO. Yeah.
No shit.
Yeah.
Nice.
People ask me if I'm a Scientologist. I say no, I'm not.
It's funny because no Scientologist will ever watch. They're not allowed to watch those documentaries.
Yeah, it was interesting. So let me ask you. Okay, so regarding aliens. I know Dr. Stephen Greer. You actually know Dr. Stephen Greer.
I met him. And
okay, so for those who don't know who Dr. Stephen Greer is, he is probably the foremost expert on ETs and or extraterrestrial life in America today. He's held multiple National Press Club briefings about what's going on. And we'll talk about him in a little, because I have some thoughts about him. But, you know, I mean, if you watch his documentaries, basically he makes the point that aliens are amongst us. They've been amongst us for a long time, and they actually mean us no harm. They're actually trying to help us. Yeah,
that's why he's bastardized, because his message is not one of fear,
right?
And therefore it's not allowed out.
My question is this, like, why, I mean, if the CIA doesn't like him, why don't they kill him? Like, they kill everyone else.
They've tried to kill him 5 times.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They tried to kill him again 2 years ago.
Interesting.
They literally sawed the 2 parts of his bike just down to the edge, and they let him, you know, and he fell, and he was in a fucking wheelchair for like 12 months. They hit him with a directed energy weapon. Him, his best friend, and his dog developed metastasized cancer in weeks.
Wow.
The same kind. And he said, I remember I was in my vehicle when, you know, we were fried. You can't not feel it. Yeah. And then my dog died. He said, my dog probably saved my life. My dog probably absorbed most of that. Weapon, and I was able to beat it. But dude, they've been trying to, people are so like there's no nuance in the thinking. You know, he's an outspoken dude. He's been since 2001, you know, in front of the public. They can't just knock him off, or they risk exposing themselves.
Right.
So they've made attempt after attempt. He survived if you think they can't give anyone they want cancer, then your understanding of what's possible in bioweapons
after the whole
predates the 50s, because this is when we first started to be able to do that. The 50s.
After the whole Trump assassination attempts, I'm starting to think that these guys aren't very good at doing this.
Well, they have to use what assets they have,
right?
You know,
right,
and that means keeping their noses clean, especially if it's a last minute thing, you know, because his schedule, like, you know, when they don't have a lot of plan, it becomes apparent that they're not so intelligent after all.
Right, they're winging it.
Yeah, the government has knowledge and has, you know, I mean, there's massive amount of evidence to show that this is, it can't all be hoaxes. Why would the government form documents, try to keep them quiet, and then slowly leak them as what? I mean, they do that for misinformation, but it's just, you're talking about decades and decades of testimony and documents and footage. They can't hide everything.
So what happened at Roswell? You referenced Roswell, and I think I have a general. You mentioned that we accidentally shot down a craft at Roswell.
Well, we didn't shoot it down. We knocked it down. You know, and that was because we turned on a new radar, which was using scalar technology, and we had no idea it was going to have the effect it had. But we were trying to detect them, and it was also. We were just the atomic bomb was housed in the same section of this thing, and we had all the latest and greatest technological feats were located in Roswell, or what do they call it, Nellis Air Force Base, and so they switched on this new radar, and this ship came hurtling out of the sky. Actually, more than one did, but the one that was found received all the publicity,
right.
And of course, the reporters saw it. Everyone saw it for what it was, and you know, you can always find out what actually happened by looking at the primary sources of the initial reports. And if you're a researcher, then you know that you can't go and read the edited, censored, that the people can't know this version. You have to look at what was first reported. And in 1947, they didn't have the capacity to control the headlines fast enough in a local paper to stop the pictures of the fucking obvious flying saucer, which had crashed, from getting out. And then you had the people who transported the bodies that they found. And they were talking before they could be shut up. And then most of them were quiet until they were about to die, and then they came back out and said, listen, we transported, you know, we thought they were children, but they were not children. They were little people.
They didn't know what it was.
3 fingers, you know what I mean? But at first they were like aghast because they thought, oh my God, they had children. The Russians put children in this thing. Oh, wait a minute. Those aren't children. Those aren't even humans, as we know.
So there seems to be a correlation from what I've listened to with Dr. Stephen Greer. There seems to be a correlation between our nuclear weapons and UFO sightings.
Yes.
They don't like them. Every time we fire a missile into space,
that's right,
they magically disappear.
And every time we've tried to detonate a nuke, in space or on the moon, which is fucking brilliant thinking. That was an actual plan by the United States. Let's detonate a nuke on the dark side of the moon, and
that might screw
just
up
to
like
see what
the
happens.
ocean gravitational pull,
Dude. I mean, like the beyond, like I'm just sure that they're just
we might not have a high tide anymore.
You know, the moon is a whole nother rabbit hole that we should
talk about.
We should at least touch on. But you know, the fact is, every time we've sent a nuke into outer space to detonate, it's been disabled and taken out by something, by UFOs.
Yeah.
You know, and the United States government does not like that at all. They do not like an unknown force that has the ability to fly by and switch off all of our
we want to nuke shit.
capacity.
I mean, come on.
And there's a whole if you're listening to this and you think for a moment that this is like conspiracy theory, pick up the book called UFO and Nukes and read about the 300 plus reported incidents by top military intel who are there because of their ability to be credible and discern what is right and what is wrong to do in a moment. You don't put people in charge of nukes who lack discernment. You train people on discernment, and then you put them in charge of those things. And they're the ones reporting and have been reporting for decades that they showed up and they just hit the switch. Why?
Yeah.
Why? They started showing up in mass after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there's, I can only speculate on why, based on what I've learned through people who do commune regularly with these beings who are either in these craft or don't need these craft. They can project their consciousness, right to another human who has the right settings on their antenna, so to speak. And they said, because y'all don't understand. I'm obviously paraphrasing, when you split the atom.
I didn't realize they were like country bumpkins.
They're from Georgia. They said, you don't understand the damage that you're doing. The damage you're doing is not just in a 3-dimensional plane. When you split the atom, you cause a massive disturbance in space time.
Yeah,
and you're playing with things you do not know, and it cannot be allowed. And it cannot be allowed. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima are one thing. The nukes are another, and so that's why there's been so much activity. And then, we had meetings that went on with Eisenhower and one other president whose name always, I think
Truman.
It was Truman.
Yeah.
Truman. And those were a series of meetings, because when you approach a civilization, there is etiquette. There is a galactic federation. Of course there is. There are rules. And the rules are pretty common sense. Like if a species is being led by a small group of people, then you go and you talk to that small group of people. You don't, people like whether those people are trustworthy or not, you have to follow protocol. Or you'll cause chaos and interfere in a species, which is not allowed. People are like, why don't they land? I was like, well, first of all, because we'd shoot fucking missiles at them.
Yeah.
The moment they showed up, the apes would fire the guns at them.
Right.
So it's not safe for them. And second of all, it would cause a massive amount of chaos. And then the people in charge would use that and say, we got to put everything under one world government. We're going to have to fight the aliens. That's what Operation Bluebeam is about.
Yeah. There's been, it's interesting you bring up Project Bluebeam.
Yeah, Project Bluebeam.
And I guess, so if I understand that correctly, for those who don't know what Project Bluebeam is, it's basically this idea that everyone, like Lockheed Martin, all the defense contractors, and I used to work at Oracle.
Oh, cool.
In the federal headquarters.
Wow.
In DC, outside of DC. So like the guys who were like dealing with all of Lockheed's servers, they were my buddies.
Right.
So like I used to know a lot about what was going, and trust me, those guys spent a lot of money. Because I could see everyone cashing those checks on the other side of the software. And so there was, anyone who was working with Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. I mean, those dudes are spending big money on defense. Mm-hmm. And, I think that, it's the kind of thing where so Bluebeam is basically where basically anything you've ever seen in a movie from an alien standpoint, they can replicate it.
Specifically, Project Bluebeam was the idea that, like, if the end game is to put the world under a single governing body,
right,
which is what they want, it'll make things a lot easier for them,
right?
And when
consolidate all nations,
right? And so. How do you? There's only so many ways you can.
Which is why Trump is probably unpopular to this segment, because he's all about national sovereignty.
That's right. And initially, that's why. But then they saw how they could use him, and so they made him popular again. When Silicon Valley aligns to you, then the orders have been given, the script has been flipped, and that's what happened with Trump. They saw how they could use what he was going to be put in charge.
He's big on defense.
Well, Planeteer, the massive surveillance center they're building. Use Biden to bring in millions of illegals. Use Trump to bring in the solution. Problem, reaction, solution. That's all it ever is. It's all it's been for 100 years plus. And so and they understand psychology. They're planting seeds. You got to understand movies like Independence Day and Alien. While they're fun to watch, they're planting the seed that they need to have in the mind of the public, so that if and when they decide that, okay, the war, we couldn't do it with war, we couldn't do it with pandemic, we couldn't do it with doomsday atmospheric event, global cooling, global warming. Right. Climate change. Ice is getting thicker. Oh shit! All right, we'll just call it climate change.
Well, listen, I was just over in London, and they have bought all that, like, hook, line, and sinker. Oh, yeah. Like in England, like, that's still going strong, but over here, not really.
I mean, it depends on the PR machine.
Yeah,
and I only mention that because literally the whole the doomsday atmospheric event. Was decided that, like, look, if all else fails, if the alien threat fails, if we can't bring the nations under one governing body with the destruction of a global war, however many it takes, then we can always use, everyone's going to want to save the planet from themselves. We can always use, a doomsday atmospheric event to make nations comply and put themselves, no one wants the world to stop working. And so they will happily hand over governance. Fear is always the vehicle. Now, I'm not saying that we aren't destroying our fucking planet, because we are. But the people who are destroying it are not you and I, Alex. They're the fucking corporations who have come up with this idea, among many others, because the corporations run the planet. The families that own the industries, they're all the same. Whether it's the banking, the armament, the energy, they have control over everything. Even in America, the land of the free, they control the money supply. They control every industry. If you make the most money and gain the most off of war or wartime footing, and you have endless amount of money, there's no timetable or limit to what you can orchestrate to make something happen, whether it takes 5 years or 10 years. Every fucking world war, every global catastrophe, with the exception of, an earthquake here or there. And as you get closer to modern day, even those become very suspect. Natural disasters are not so natural anymore. And that's because that technology we have makes that child's play. We've had it for 70 years. We've only gotten better at it.
So Bluebeam is basically a simulated alien invasion.
Yeah. And initially they were going to use holographs, but like that look real. But they don't have to do that now. Now we have a whole fleet, and I would say I mean the contractors underground that work for the United States government in conjunction with. The reason why it's not a secret that, yeah, you can go to government and demand disclosure, but the government doesn't know its ass from a hole in the ground. It's right. It's these companies in conjunction with the very few people in government that have all the secrets, and understand what's
interesting.
Been kept.
So you're saying it's really the Lockheeds, the General Dynamics, the Northrops. They're running all this whole show.
That's right.
And there's just a few point people in the government that work with them.
Highly compartmentalized, and that's the biggest problem is, and that's why they did it, because under the Constitution, these programs are illegal. You can't have programs operating outside the governance of Congress and without approval, and they're funneling money in from God knows where. They used the Cold War to build up the programs. They got Reagan to give an insane amount of money. And, you can see Reagan was, he wasn't the sharpest tack by the time he was.
Well, he did get shot.
Yeah, he did get shot.
And he was like fairly incapacitated after that.
Yeah, he wasn't so capacitated before that. He was a sucker. But, and side note, he got shot by a longtime Bush family friend. Just coincidence, of course.
Yeah.
Another coincidence. Happened to be. And then Bush was already running the country anyway. He had been running it since before Reagan got in. So he just took over. But Bush knows, Bush is privy, not W, but Herbert was.
Right. Herbert Walker Bush, I think, probably knew everything going on.
He was Cheney to a degree. They had more knowledge of these underground programs than probably any president, even Clinton, who was a longtime drug running partner and criminal with the Bush family through Mena, Arkansas, through the Boys on the Tracks. And,
right.
I mean, you're talking about over $100 million worth of cocaine coming in and out of Mena, Arkansas, a small fly speck of a town in Mena, Arkansas. Planes.
That's basically the movie American Made is.
American Made is a perfect.
Yeah. I actually have a friend in that movie.
I just did it's going to be a 4-part special, maybe 5 parts on the Bush family crime syndicate, the connections between.
Roger Stone did a big thing on that.
He did. Yeah. I love that guy.
He wrote a book, I think, on the Bush family.
He did. Yeah. The Bush crime family.
Yeah.
Good book, and what I'm saying is not theory, just because you've never heard about it.
Yeah.
The Clintons, oh my God, the Bushes have a legacy in crime, and they were trained by some of the Skull and Bones at Yale was started by a family named the Tafts and the Russell. Did you ever hear it? What does it say on our SAG waivers?
I don't know.
Taft Hartley.
Yeah.
Right? Something like that.
Yeah. There's a Taft Hartley Act. Yeah.
That's where it comes. The Taft family and the Russell family, they were the ones who brought the opium trade into Europe, and they made a fortune. And so they knew how to do it. And Prescott Bush, Herbert's father,
right,
W's great grandfather, learned from the Russell Trust family, who owns the property that Yale is on, who started the Skull and Bones for this very reason. He learned that this is how you build a fortune, And at the time, they had Vietnam, and they had access. That's what Vietnam was about, the poppy seeds. That's why it was a forever war. They were making so much money off. They brought the heroin in. The entire war on drugs that we grew up seeing the stupid ass commercials for was created by the United States, by the CIA, and with the Bush family leading the charge every step of the way. And when Vietnam ran out, they went from heroin to cocaine in South America and then back to Afghanistan, back to the poppy fields in 2001.
Right.
It's all about drug running, money laundering.
Which, by the way, I have a very good friend from college who went into the Marines after college. Mm-hmm. He commanded, I want to say, a whole battalion, probably about 140 guys, Marines.
Yeah.
I think he was a colonel. And he said basically we were guarding poppy fields.
Yeah, no.
He's like, that's all we basically did was just guarding.
That was our objective.
And I was like, I remember when he told me this, I'm like, are you serious? He's like, yeah. He's like, we were basically just guarding poppy fields, like opium. Yeah.
Weapons of mass destruction.
So
what are they saying Iran has or is building? They can't even say that they have them. They have to say that they're this close. People just don't learn.
Let me ask you this. So we've covered aliens. I feel like we got a good deep dive on aliens. I want to, another big conspiracy or mysterious event in U.S. history is obviously JFK.
Oh yeah.
Give me your take on JFK.
So I did a 2-part special on JFK, which I highly recommend because what I did was I took years of research and I tried to, and this is a very challenging thing to do because there's so much information out there, but I streamlined it into 2 1-hour specials on some of the things that I felt like when you hear this, then you can't forget it. You can hang your hat on it. You can repeat it. You can talk to people about why everything that they told us about JFK and what happened is fucking impossible. It's not just a false narrative. It's literally completely bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, it's
like a single shooter. You know, there's no way it was a single shooter.
No, it's a defiance of physics. It's, you know what I mean? Like,
I've watched a lot of, my mom and I are very both like into JFK stuff. Whenever I go home and like hang out with her, like she'll want to like watch some documentary, you know, about JFK or something. And from what we've watched quite a bit over the years, and from what I can tell, it seemed like, I do think Oswald was there. I think he was. He was like one of 5 shooters.
No, Oswald wasn't a shooter.
You don't think Oswald was a shooter?
He was not a shooter.
Okay, so they literally just used him as a patsy.
He was literally given. He was given that job in the bookstore. He was a double agent.
Okay, you know, but he did have CIA involvement.
Oh, the CIA and FBI involvement. CIA knew where he was.
Right,
and it's a fact that they deleted that. I forgot it's called like a flashpoint or something like that. Like, so the CIA knew where he was at all times. Because even back then, we could easily track an agent wherever they went, you know. So it gives you a little idea about today's technology when you hear on the news, like, oh, the suspect is missing.
You're like, no, he's not.
Like, or we had no idea that this was going to happen. Wait a minute. You can eavesdrop on people in fucking caves, you know, 3,000 feet underground, and you don't know, you can't find.
How do they eavesdrop on people 3,000 feet underground?
The technology's been around for
so just like
30 years.
Like sound radar things that they could just.
You would be shocked.
Yeah.
And a lot of it comes from the reverse engineering of the ET and the craft that they found. A lot of the breakthroughs that they've.
So yeah, that's interesting. So a lot of the technological breakthroughs you're saying that have come from that.
And so like when you see something come out that is a technological wonder, like an iPhone,
right?
That's 20 years been used underground. You know, in almost every iteration. You know, it's the tech sector is 20, 30 years behind what the contractors are doing underground.
Yeah.
In some cases, more. You know, talking about the fact that we've had ships that can, and that on the daily, enter and exit Earth's atmosphere, not only just to the moon, but to the bases in Jupiter, you know, and beyond. Interstellar. Interstellar travel has been possible, according to Ben Rich, the CEO of fucking Skunk Works, since 1954.
That's Lockheed, right?
Yeah. They merged. And that he wrote that. Why would he write that? If it, you know, like it was a personal handwritten note that he wrote that was then found.
Yeah.
You know?
So there's a couple of things I've read and watched about this that, you know, so first of all, like, was Woody Harrelson's dad there as a shooter?
Yeah, Woody Harrelson's dad was a merc. He was there as he was hired as a shooter. You know, they couldn't pin anything down him. And if you had CIA involvement,
right?
Most of the people they had, you know, the CIA used their connections. Of course, it was the CIA who created Secret Service identity badges. And so almost all the people on the ground who were shooters had Secret Service badges, which is why they were not reported. They were not, you know, if questions were asked, they would flash the badge. There was no, you know, they had their bases covered. What they couldn't predict was, you know, the amount of chaos and tension and the firing squad that they had, obviously it didn't go well, you know.
It was a little messy.
You know, I mean, a little messy is one word. It was a shit.
I mean, there was like bullets flying everywhere.
Yeah. And so they had trained those assassins.
Yeah.
To do this to Fidel Castro and to other South American dictators. And then when that didn't work out because Castro was protected, he had informants in the CIA and his bloodline goes back to some of these families. So he was off limits. And that's why as much as we fucking tried to kill him, and we did, we tried every which way to kill Castro because we wanted his oil and we wanted his sugar cane. You know, and the moment he won, we had been backing both him and his enemies. He won, he nationalized the oil and he kicked us out. And like people like Clint Murchison and the Bush family, they lost like, you know, what would be today hundreds of millions of dollars, and they were fucking livid. And Kennedy wouldn't help them. You know, Kennedy was like, I'm not trying to get us into a nuclear war. You know, like Russia, he was trying to make peace. And they kept going.
That's not really popular with those guys. Yeah,
not at all. So yeah, absolutely. Woody Harrelson's father was there, and he was arrested eventually, and you know they couldn't make anything stick. Although he was serving time, I think, for something, but he was a fucking hitman, you know? And he even says, you know, you really think that Lee Harvey Oswald acted without the help of a government agency? Are you that naive? You know, in the interview that survives with him.
So in this, how many shooters do you think there were?
Oh, I think there was at least 6, probably 8.
6 to 8 shooters.
Yeah.
Wow. And I thought there was like 5.
And we know who they are. You know, we know where they were. We know who took the shot from the grassy knoll.
So yeah, I was gonna say it seems there was 2 guys up in the building behind him. They're in windows.
They had one person in the building that they put Lee Harvey Oswald in, although Lee didn't know that.
Okay.
Lee was just there. Lee worked there. The CIA got him the job a few weeks before that.
Oh,
he was drinking a Coca-Cola when...
So he's like just hanging out at the bookstore.
Essentially, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and
wow, that sucks.
He knew shit was going down, but he couldn't do anything about it. You know, this is speculative, but 2 months earlier in Chicago, they were going to try a version of this to knock Kennedy off. And when Lee Harvey Oswald caught wind of it, an anonymous tip was sent into the Chicago police, and it was by a person named Lee. And they never were given a last name, but when, you know, people who have heard the recording said that was Lee Harvey Oswald, who had learned what was actually happening and was trying to both extricate himself from it and keep this democratic coup from going down. But he had no idea the level he was in and how many years he had been being put in place to be fucking patsied, you know. But he was a double agent. His job was going to be to bring a bioweapon to Castro, you know, a cigar that Castro could smoke that would give him cancer and have him die of natural causes. Now, if you doubt the veracity of that statement, read Mary Sherman's Monkey, I think it's called. Mary Sherman's Monkeys. And they were doing massive experiments with bioweapons. They took all the best doctors in America, the prodigies, and they said, they were working on cure for cancer. They said, we need you to help us save the world. And they said, how? They said, if we can't kill Castro and make it look natural, then we're going to end up in a Holocaust, in a nuke Holocaust with Russia. And these doctors were like, fuck, we got to save the world.
Yeah.
We got to develop this turbo cancer causing agent and knock Castro off, or else we're all going to fry. We're all going to nuke. And that's the song and dance they were pitched. That's why they got incredible minds of decent people to work on developing super cancers that can be injected and spread through something like smoking a cigar or a shot, you know, an injection. And then eventually they started using light waves, and it's crazy what they can do now. But fact, Lee Harvey Oswald was in New Orleans, and he was to act as a carrier to bring this bioweapon, and he did, to the Mexican embassy, and then meet his contact there and take it to Castro. And he was being groomed.
Was that effective?
They couldn't get Castro with it, but they developed their bioweapon. They had their turbo cancer causing bioweapon, absolutely. And you know where it came from?
Where?
An early 50s version of the polio vax.
Oh, interesting.
And if you want to understand the details of that, I highly recommend you watch a podcast with Danny Jones that features Dr. Jack Kruse. And Dr. Jack Kruse is a neurosurgeon who went to school in New Orleans and was close friends with Garrison. The only charges and trial that went on publicly was Garrison charged Clay Shaw with killing the president. Mm-hmm. It was the best they could do. Clay Shaw was involved, but he wasn't, you know, he didn't pull the trigger.
Yeah.
But his daughter was a nurse at the medical center when he was doing his residency, and she spilled the beans to him about everything she learned and saw from her father about all that, and about this, how they took this experimental polio thing that caused cancer in these 2 kids almost immediately, and then they, instead of shelving it, you know, they put it in a vaccine and they shipped it to hundreds of millions of people. because that's what they do.
Yeah, interesting. So on that topic, and like, dude, I could talk to you for like 3 hours.
Yeah, we shouldn't talk too much about that, the medical stuff, though.
Well, no, actually, I wanted to get your take on COVID and the vaccine, and there's there was that documentary that came out called Plandemic.
Yeah, great movie, and its sequel is even better. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, like, what's your take on what happened in 2020?
Oh, I mean, that was a problem reaction solution experiment. That they had been developing and waiting to roll out. And when they saw they had the right amount of press, and fear instilled from China, which of course we started that lab in China when the
Wuhan lab, right?
The Wuhan lab was a joint venture. It was,
right.
And that was so that if and when the shit hit the fan, America and China could go, he did it,
Right.
And right now I'm making, who did that? The Scarecrow and fucking,
yeah.
It was like, go that way.
Yeah.
And again, everything that happens when they tell you like, oh, this was a jump from a monkey to a scientist, and we don't know how. We can only speculate the scientist maybe had sex with the monkey. What? Wait, what?
Yeah.
What? Lyme disease.
Yeah.
Oh, well, so there was a mutation in a tick, and we found out it was no, motherfucker. There was a biolab in Lyme, Connecticut. You were experimenting with bioweapons on ticks.
Yeah.
Period. Whenever they sell this story of this species jumping pathogen,
right?
They're lying. They developed those.
So you're saying that COVID, Lyme disease, maybe AIDS,
100%.
They're all bioweapons.
Absolutely, unequivocally.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
They're not naturally occurring anything.
Right.
What's a testament to the human body and its resilience is our ability to develop, certain immunities and resilience to even these types of Frankenstein lab-created pathogens.
Right. So you're saying, so I assume you never took the vax, I assume.
No,
yeah.
Fuck no.
Yeah, I didn't either, for the record. Basically, because I just felt like my body has always had a really good immune system.
I didn't, by the time that bullshit rolled out, I was in I had been doing a lot of meditation and I'd been deprogramming a lot of belief systems that not only did they not serve me, but they were completely illusion. They were total illusion. And a lot of them were fear-based. And so with the moment the shit hit the fan, I was like, what the fuck is going on? What is everyone talking about? Like,
I
viruses
I feel like a lot of people kind of like snapped out of their old paradigms that year,
or at least over time.
A lot of between like 2020 and 2022. I mean, even in the old days, it was like Republican, Democrat,
but that got rearranged.
Like that totally got rearranged. Because like people who I feel like I used to not agree with about anything, like all of a sudden, like we pretty much agree on everything.
It's amazing how that works.
And so I think that it's just fascinating how it feels like a lot of people really woke up through all of that.
Well, and David Icke talks about this, who I've had him on my podcast twice. Say what you want about David Icke and his beliefs about certain species on this planet. He's an incredible mind, and his research is.
Does he run London Real?
No, that's Brian Rose.
Okay.
He's just been on Brian Rose's podcast like 6 times.
Yeah.
And it started during the pandemic.
Oh, he's English, right? David Icke?
Yeah. He's definitely.
And he's like a conspiracy researcher, right?
Totally. I mean, you want to learn a lot about this world, read David Icke's books. And you don't need to believe anything he says about certain families having reptilian bloodline. Just imagine it a metaphor, since that's how they act anyway. But read the research he's done and sourced and vetted, and see what is actually happening and has happened in this world.
So you think there are overlords in the world that actually have reptilian bloodline?
I don't know if I believe that we're all a hodgepodge of around 22 different races of beings that came together and had a great idea. Mm-hmm. And I think that we'll do this. Humanity will do this one day. We will come together with all these races that we have been in communion with for hundreds, if not millions and millions of years, and we'll say, let's have an experiment. What if we were to take our DNA with yours, and we find a planet, and we use, because you need indigenous DNA. The the vitality and strength of DNA comes from the evolution of life on that planet. And so they needed to find a planet, find the right place for it. And then they did this grand experiment. And it was, I think, going very well until a certain species came in that needed resources from the planet. And, we live in a universe of free will. So these beings went against what is proper etiquette and law, and they came down, and they're known as the Anunnaki. Now, you can call them whatever the fuck they want. I don't know.
That's an alien race.
Yeah. Essentially. Again, they came into our atmosphere in this three-dimensional reality, which is very, very hard on most. It's not hard on us. We're from here. Even us, it's hard on. Look how fast we age. My point is, they came and they needed resources, and they were doing all the work themselves, and it was taking a lot of time and a great toll on their physical bodies, even in the protection that they were wearing. And they were looking around like, what the fuck are we doing? Look over there, and you got a bunch of hominids who follow the leader, who are strong, able-bodied, built for this atmosphere. They were like, why don't we just tweak their DNA and have them do this for us? We can, it'll all be done. And if you look at our telomeres and you look at our chromosomes, you can see that around 250 to 300,000 years ago, there was a fusion that happened. And it's as clear as day. And you can look into the medical research of this. You can look into the study that I think it was Yale or Harvard did in 1994 on this. And they can't explain it. They say clearly, there has been a fusion, what appears to be an ancient fusion of, what do they call them? Of chromosomes. And it just so happens that the fusion is what gives us our big brains, our ability to feel the amount of emotions we do, all these different, very human things that separate us from the animals in more ways than we used to be. And that happened around 250,000 years ago. They know that couldn't have happened naturally, and they have no explanation for it. So the scientists who did the study, they wouldn't even put their name on it. It's signed and it's a published study, but they said, we conclude, and no one wanted to, because they couldn't explain it, and they know how it was going to come off. But that was, I believe, the Anunnaki's, intervention when they needed a slave caste of humans who could do the mining they needed for them. They needed gold for their atmosphere, and they were going to take it from ours. And so, from there, you have an insert of genetics from this race of beings, which were in part reptilian. That is what I understand. But they were sentient beings, and they had a hierarchical system, which is very reptilian of them.
Yeah.
And, one brother was like, look in their eyes, they're more sentient than they were. This is wrong, and we're going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And the other brother was like, we need the fucking gold. If you don't like it, get the fuck out. And so there was a division and a conflict. And eventually, they did get in trouble, and they did have to get the fuck out, but not before they made a mess of everything. And they sped up what would have been the natural evolution of the human being on this planet, which had already had 21 or 22 intergalactic races in their DNA waiting to unfurl as we evolve. And it probably would have been a beautiful, slow evolution, It's like a fucking 9-year-old who's 250 pounds, who's just going around fucking breaking shit, that is humanity, essentially. We're just completely spiritually immature for our technological capacity. And that's why we're making such a mess of everything. But, I think it was the Anunnaki who really sowed the seeds for that, because they changed the course of our evolution, which was allowed to be because it sped everything up. And it's going to be a rockier go for humanity, and maybe take more iterations or civilizations to get there, to figure shit out, to figure out why we're here and remember who we are. But what can you do? We live in a universe of free will. Yeah. So the Anunnaki were kicked the fuck out, and then it was like quarantined. Nobody's allowed by Earth, all right? And then, the moon was brought. if you go back further, the moon was brought here, you know, and if you look at the moon, you see there's a reason why none of the craters, no matter what their size.
The moon is occupied, right?
The moon is fucking totally, the moon is a space, it's a space station. I mean, you think people got the idea for the Death Star. That's just a humanization of what is inherently true and in our consciousness. Without the moon, there would be no stability for life to develop on this planet. And so when they were looking to terraform the Earth and make it habitable.
It's protected a lot of asteroids over the years, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it obviously plays a big role in our gravitational
There is no
pull.
moon in the observable solar system that acts like ours. None. Not in our solar system, not even close. There's no planet that has a single moon that remains essentially at the same distance. And people are like, oh, it's moving away 1 inch a minute or 1 inch a year. I'm like, so is it really moving away if it's moving away 1 inch a year? And where did it start? I'm like, it ain't moving away. And any other moons have this great variety in orbit, you know, and they're affected by. Our moon does nothing but bring peace and tidal and seasonal stability to our planet. It's hollow. It's completely hollow. And if you question that and you think it's a rocky body, look at the seismic recordings that they took from the moon landing and how long the moon rang like a fucking bell when they landed. They were like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
You know, and the fact that, you know, you can, I'm not telling you that the moon landing in part wasn't staged and filmed in fucking Hollywood by Kubrick, but two things can be true at one time, my friends. We did land on the moon. There was a lot of people there. We were told to get the fuck out and not come back unannounced, okay? That's why we never went back.
Yeah, I've heard that's Greer's theory is that.
Of course.
So like a lot of people think that the moon landing was fake.
Part of it was faked.
And I've heard Greer say, no, we went once, and they were like, it was a party, and they were like, don't come back.
You're like, no one fucking invited you. Go back to whence you came.
Yeah.
And they did. And that's the reason why we never, and look, if you doubt this, why did Russia never go after we went? They were right. They were racing there too with us. Right. Why? Because they knew. They knew what happened.
There's something over there.
Of course. Yeah. And they know to this day, you know, and there's a secret space program in existence that's been in existence since after Roswell.
So let me ask you this. What do you think? So Elon Musk wants to go to Mars.
Yeah. With his rocket.
I mean,
listen, Elon Musk is a smart dude.
Is he connected to all this or not? Is he outside it or inside it?
He's inside it. He's connected, but he's part of the conspiracy. He's part of the gatekeeping community, you know.
So he's kind of he's a front man for this whole thing.
Dude, he's using rockets.
Right.
They've been obsolete and outdated for, well, we're approaching 75 years, you know, almost a century now. And he's dusted them off. He's using electric vehicles. Guess what Ford built before he built the Ford Model T? An electric vehicle. And it was decided upon by the Rockefellers and other interests that the most profitable means to do this would be gasoline. And then the farmers started to create their own means of gas using ethanol and their ability to create their own gas. And we had prohibition. People think prohibition was about morality. The United States and morality don't mix ever. Mm-hmm. And so they made prohibition thing. They said, well, we have to look out for the moral rectitude of the American people. No, it was about making alcohol illegal so the farmers could not get a patented system to get fuel outside of the Rockefeller fucking oil fields. You understand?
Yeah,
That's what it was all about.
So you're saying that we're not going to get to Mars via rockets?
No.
Because it's too far.
If we did, it would be a dog and pony show. It would be all for a distraction of the public.
Right. So you're saying that maybe like what Skunk Works or Lockheed has in terms of like interstellar travel, that's actually what it's going to take.
And that's what they've been using.
Yeah.
They go to Mars anytime they want.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take them
So they're going to Mars now, you're saying?
If they want to. I believe that there are remnant colonies on Mars. Mars was definitely inhabited. You can see the structures. You can look at the satellite structure. You can see that, you know, anybody who analyzes
but you can't really live on the top of Mars, right? You have to live inside of Mars.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But
the climate's too harsh on the
well, and there's no atmosphere. The atmosphere has been obliterated.
Yeah.
You know, and there's all kinds of theories about that. But the scarring on the surface of the planet is not natural. you know, and just because everything is covered with dust doesn't mean you can't see the remnants of the bases and civilizations. And there is a lot of secret space program whistleblowers who talk about Mars being colonized, you know, and they're, you know, there was a fucking bill that passed about 2 years ago, and it just makes, you know, tiny mention of no corporation on Earth shall be liable for slave labor on other planets. Wait, what? We can't get anything passed expediently, but you guys just rushed that one through. No one noticed the language about other planets and slave labor laws.
Wow.
Like, why would they do that? I'll tell you why they do that. Because they were heading off what they saw to be a possible, you know, leak through litigation. Because there's a lot of reports that, you know, some of these ETs and in conjunction with some of the more bastardly humans were using and abducting people and using them as slave labor, telling people on Mars that Earth has been destroyed. You know, that this is, and a lot of the abductions that have happened, you know, have been people being taken to these other planets, you know, or to Mars specifically to work.
Yeah.
China style, you know?
Right.
Anyway,
Interesting.
It's, you know, look, you can see the satellite images. I recommended that podcast with Dr. Jack Kruse it's on the Danny Jones podcast. That will blow your mind. Another podcast that'll blow your mind if you want to learn about Mars and what they know and what they've always known is a podcast with Joe McMonagle. McMonagle, spelled like with an eagle in there. And that's on the Sean Ryan podcast before Sean Ryan kind of, you know, was kind of hijacked for certain elements.
By the CIA.
Yeah. Which is only a matter of time.
I'm hoping I don't get hijacked by the CIA.
I'm hoping I don't either. You know, but Joe McMonagle was in both the Army and the Navy, and he was a remote viewer. And so he was privy to a lot of intel and got them a lot of intel, including intel on Mars, you know. So, and then he got the satellite images to back up what he saw, and a lot of interesting. That podcast will blow your mind as well. That's a Sean Ryan podcast with Joe McMonagle. That's a must watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Faust, we're out of time, but I do, like, seriously, I could talk to you for 3 hours about all of this. This is super interesting. We got like a primer on a variety of different topics, which was really interesting. Obviously, people can find your podcast in the description below on this video. Lots of great information there, and thanks so much for joining us. You really gave us a lot to think about today.
Yeah. If you guys want to hear more or learn more, you know, the podcast channel on YouTube is Far Out with Faust. And sometimes we venture into topics that are not exactly algorithmically friendly. And so I have a Patreon page where the uncensored versions of a lot of those talks go. Also, I'm on Instagram at the one Faust Checho, FaustChecho. And then we have an IG account that's Far Out with Faust. And we put out daily videos. And we have a few series that we're putting out both on YouTube, and we're available to download on audio across all podcast platforms.
Awesome. Well, thanks for dropping in.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. You too.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it, man.
Have a good one.